Good morning, everyone. It's lovely to be here. Thank you, Ed, for the introduction. I think you might have spoken one of my slides, almost. As Louise was looking for her script, it's always that moment when I'm so jealous of sighted people that they can read scripts. It's not something I'm very good at. I have to kind of try and store it in here, and hopefully it'll all come out reasonably well. So I'm the Director of Arts and Disability Ireland. I have been for 11 years. And as Ed said, Arts and Disability Ireland is the national development and resource organisation for arts and disability in the Republic of Ireland. And we champion the creativity of artists with disabilities, and we promote inclusive experiences for audiences with disabilities. And the important thing is that all of that we do in partnership with either one or more partners. In fact, there is very little, if anything, now that ADI does by itself. And that's something that I suppose over the last 11 years I've learned, is that, one, we're a small organisation. We are now a staff of 4, but when I started with ADI, I was it, working in a small converted dark room in another arts organisation in Dublin who were project managing ADI at the time. And since then we've grown from 2 projects in the city of Dublin to, I think last year, we were involved in 19 partnerships across 12 local authorities, and working directly in supporting 20 artists. But that's not to say that there were not a whole lot of other people that were influenced or engaged in what ADI was doing. This idea for working in partnership didn't really happen by accident, and in fact, I wasn't going to tell this story, but I've decided I am. The very first time I was in this space was a very fractured experience. Maeve Deneen was there at the time. She just recently started at the Arts Office, and I had moved to England to work as artist manager with Equata, the Disability Arts Development Agency for South West England, and I was invited to be a speaker at an event that I suppose was looking at the involvement of arts and health and arts and disability within Cork 2005, the year that Cork was cultural capital. And I suppose what was interesting, that was that the event, which was called Whose Art, was at the end of 2003. And it was, I think, probably one of the most fractious events I've ever been at. And I was in the middle of causing most of the mayhem. In that there was a debate emerged between who had the right to speak in terms on behalf of people with disabilities, and where disabilities, arts and disability related to arts and health, and where they overlapped. And there was a feeling that day that there was an underrepresentation of people with disabilities. I think what really strikes me about that, and the reason I tell the story, is actually that I think debate is really, really healthy. And in hindsight, I think the only thing I regret about the debate that day was there was so much falling out. And in fact, I think it took arts and disability and arts and health on very different tracks for a period of time afterwards. And as I say, the actual debate around ownership, who has the right to speak, who should be in the space, those are all debates that should be had. But if people stop talking to each other, in hindsight, I don't think that's a good thing. And I suppose at the heart of that debate at the time was a feeling among some artists with disabilities that disability arts, which is art that's led by people with disabilities, about the disabled experience, really was the only art that mattered. And I think when I came back to Ireland in 2005, one of the things I decided, and took up the job with Arts and Disability Ireland, I suppose my opinions had changed a bit, but we decided we'd have a look at arts and disability. And we created this anthology of called Face On, which explored disability arts from Ireland and beyond, and we had 24 different opinions from around the world. And one of the biggest criticisms of the publication was it didn't have a single voice. And actually by that stage I'd come to the conclusion that in fact arts and disability didn't need a single voice. In fact, in many ways what we needed to do was get as many people into the space as possible, and hopefully never revisit again the fact that we needed to have a big falling out in a debate. That actually, really it was about everyone putting their cards on the table. And so if a person wanted to be a disabled artist, or a deaf artist with a big D, you know, whose cultural experience comes from sign language, or an artist with a small d, a deaf artist with a small d, or just wanted to be an artist with a disability, or wanted to be a collaborative artist, that actually all these things were fine. And then in fact really what it was about was everyone engaging and everyone having the space to engage, and not really being about the rights and wrongs, but actually about the differences and celebrating those differences and trying to manage those differences. And in many ways that was the root of, I suppose, ADI's partnerships. And one of the other partnerships that we started, which was really important to me when I returned to Ireland, was to engage audiences with disabilities. Now, I know today is very much about artists with disabilities, and that is really, really important. But one of the things that's always intrigued me as a person with a disability is that I'm kind of, over the years, always been intrigued that my first option as a person with a disability very often, or the first offering that's made to me as a person with a disability, is to participate in a project. And I'm always intrigued by that. And I think we need to think about a lot more about the opportunities we create for people with disabilities to engage in other people's art as well as their own art making, if they choose to make art at all. And we need to be a lot more cognizant of that. And just a short story, I remember when I worked in England interviewing a young dancer, a wheelchair user, who was part of an integrated dance company for a mentoring project we organised and at Equata. And we asked her who influenced her most in, you know, in dance. And she very promptly responded saying, myself. And she explained that in the 10 years she'd been involved in integrated dance, that she'd only once seen a performance she wasn't herself involved in. And I think we need, while ADI is very much at the forefront of access for audiences with disabilities, I think that's something we all need to think about a lot more and continue to reflect on and challenge. One of the other things about, from ADI's perspective, about partnerships, which is really important, is that as a small organisation, connecting in with organisations who actually can add value to what we do is really important. On the slide here is Robert Softly Gale, and this was from a show that he presented at the Dublin Theatre Festival back in 2014 called If These Spasms Could Speak. And Robert is an actor and dramaturg writer from Scotland. And for me, what was important about that was that not only did we get an amazing show into the Dublin Theatre Festival, it had 4 sellout performances. It was made fully accessible with audio description, with captioning, and with sign language interpreting. And we had sign language interpreting and speech to text for a post-show discussion. But also, it ended up in the Theatre Festival programme that had a huge circulation in Dublin. I also got to write for the show programme to reflect on arts and disability and Robert's show. And so with that partnership, there was a much broader reach for what we do and for what artists with disabilities do. Another aspect to partnership which I really think is important, we've, through Arts and Disability Networking, done a lot of work in Galway, Cork and in Mayo, and in fact Arts and Disability Networking was about embedding and developing arts and disability at a local level in Galway, Cork and Mayo. But one of the things that for me was really exciting, and it's an example because I'll talk about Ignite at the end, is when we worked in Galway, we worked with That's Life to develop a nightclub which they had for people with intellectual disabilities, and we worked with them as part of ADN to move that from a hotel in Galway to the Black Box. Now when That's Life's nightclub Club Tropicana happens in June each year in the Black Box, it's a sellout. That's a very large space, and actually you can see the Black Box is entirely dressed in all the mobiles and artistry of the That's Life projects from around Galway City and County. And what really excited me this year was when we hosted our conference in Galway, our Creative Connections, we were able to commission That's Life, who from that very small nightclub project, which we put €6,000 into when it happened, that we moved it to the Black Box, we're actually able to manage the evening showcase event and produce the evening showcase event and decorate the entire space for our conference. Not only that, the Theatre Forum, which is our national performing arts membership organisation, they later on last summer hosted their event in Galway in the Black Box. Part of the evening was in the Black Box, and they again used That's Life to dress the space. And for me, actually adding value to what artists do and adding value to the projects we work with and linking them in with other people is all part of that participation that Louise mentioned. And really, I do think citizenship is a byword for participation and people being able to engage and contribute in the space, in the artistic and cultural space. Now, just to return to access on a more, I suppose, what people would perceive access to be. You can see examples here of audio description with Discovery pens, which is it's like an MP3 player being used at the Butler Gallery, which assists a visually impaired and blind person to listen to descriptions of what are going on, what the artworks that are on exhibit are all about. On the bottom you can see a captioning unit, which is like live subtitling for deaf people, and that's just I think it's during the break there's an advert for the Plough and the Stars tour, because not only does audio description and captioning happen in Dublin at the Abbey Theatre, but it actually does happen all over Ireland. And in fact, the Discovery Pen project I spoke about, we piloted with the Butler Gallery in Kilkenny. And then on the other picture is we've been working with the IFI to to have regular audio description and open captioning of films at the Irish Film Institute, and there's now a programme of films each month. So, and as I say, that's an example of, you know, access for specific impairment groups. But for me, I do think access is as much about who can come into the space. Recently, we had Jess Tom and her show Backstage in Biscuitland at Access Ballymun as part of the Dublin Theatre Festival. And Jess's show, some of you may have either seen the show or you may have seen her on The Late Late Show, because she was interviewed by Ryan Tubridy a few weeks back, is an autobiographical piece. Jess has Tourette's, and one of the things she says a lot, one of her tics, is biscuit. Another one is hedgehog, and she has a lot more colourful ones than that. Like one of the ones that she picked up when she was on tour in America was my goat farts dollars, which I quite liked. But one of the reasons that Jess made this show Backstage in Biscuitland was that she was felt totally excluded from theatre because of her tics. Audience members wanted her excluded, and sometimes performers wanted her excluded. And one of the lovely stories that she told once was that when she actually took Backstage in Biscuitland for its first outing was to the Edinburgh Fringe, and it was a huge success at Edinburgh. Many of the artists who were also performing at Edinburgh went to see her show, and then came backstage and gave her tickets and said, "Come and see my show, because I now get what the problem is. I now see that actually we've a very rigid way of making and presenting theatre, and the way we expect our audience to sit in our space is very formal. And actually, your relaxed performance allows many more people to enter the space and leave the space, and actually maybe even you know, shuffle and walk around or say things, the stuff that we aren't normally allowed do. And actually, isn't that a very liberating thing?" I can't finish, or I can't be in Cork and also not talk about Ignite. Ignite was an outcome from ADN, Arts and Disability Networking. And in fact, you know, I was saying to somebody this week that in fact, you know, they were saying, what's one of the biggest things you did? And for me, it's got to be Cork Ignite, in terms of having 7,000 of an audience, or 7,000 plus, enjoy Simon McKeown's projection of Cork Ignite onto the College of Commerce here on Culture Night 2015, when he worked with Cope Foundation and with Shush and with Sound Out and the National Sculpture Factory and Create. And for me, it wasn't just that we could have an event of that scale, but what I think is really exciting is that we can, in this sector of arts and disability, make art that can happen on a really large scale, and that actually can be part of that larger arts fabric. It's, you know, as I pointed out to Finian McGrath recently, prior to the arts debate, and was very disappointed he didn't mention it in the arts debate, is that actually people with disabilities aren't just taking from the arts pot. This isn't about charity, and it's not about good works. It actually is about us as creators contributing. And you know, I pointed out to somebody during the week from the press that actually we can do cultural tourism with the best of them. And it's not that culture and tourism is the be-all and end-all, but actually the truth is, we can operate at loads of different levels within the arts. Our contribution can be a small single artwork, it can be a participatory artwork, it can be cultural tourism, it can be many different things, because actually over the time I've been working in Ireland, the sector has developed hugely, and the way people are contributing has hugely improved and grown. You know, I remember the first time I met Anne Brabard from Crawford. We were working on Altered Images exhibition, and I wrote for that catalogue. And one of my comments about access at that time for exhibitions was that I always felt access, for me as a visually impaired person, was very like going to, you know, the returns trolley in the library, where I used to always in NCAD go to the returns trolley in the library, because that's where the best books were. And it was much harder to use the microfiche, because that's how you searched for books at the time. And I think at that time, you know, around access, that, you know, that's the challenge, is to get to the point where more and more of what's going on, both from a making perspective and from a creation perspective, or from an audience perspective, can be engaged in. And the last thing which I want to say is about education. One of the trends that has concerned me over recent years, and I think we need to challenge more, is the fact that we need to get more and more of the educational institutions to engage with artists, particularly with intellectual disabilities and people in supported studio sector, so that there can be a wider dialogue and critiquing of the work. You know, I was struck a while back when we worked with a group of curators, and one of the things that they said that scared them the most in working with people with disabilities was that they were very concerned that they didn't receive the same education as they did, and they consequently didn't speak the same art language. And I think if we're all to be active citizens in the cultural space, that dialogue is something that we actually need to really foster. And rather than actually saying, well, the education space isn't quite working because it's too rigid, we need actually to get the education space to serve more and more the needs of the diverse public and potential artists who want to engage with that space. And just lastly, I do have to explain that there were two other Ignite commissions. There was the Galway Ignite Commission, led by Jez Coburn, and there's also Silent Moves, which I know is going to be shown, I think, during the lunchtime today, which is the Ignite Commission from Mayo. And in fact, the three short videos about Cork, Galway and Mayo, as far as I know, are also being shown in the One Worth Key Gallery as well. So thank you very much.